Hello there. I wanted to read through an article that I was sent very kindly by Catherine. Thank you very much, Catherine. And it's an article in the Private Eye magazine, in their series of articles written by MD, which is Dr. Phil Hammond. And this is part 11. I remember looking at Private Eye in this supermarket last week, and I was looking to see if there was another article in there, but this must be from the latest edition. So this is part 11 in the series of articles with the title, The Lucy Letby Case. Thank you again, Catherine. I'm going to read it through and make commentary, or make comments, I should say, as I go along. Nicholas Reinberg, former senior coroner for Cheshire. Well, that assume that means he's retired then, perhaps, unless he works somewhere else, told the Thirlwall inquiry, which is examining, quote, events at the Countess of Chester Hospital, close quote, he was, quote, horribly disappointed, close quote, that not a single consultant or manager had passed on suspicions of foul play for any of the babies neonatal nurse Lucy Letby was convicted of murdering. And then there's a quote from Reinberg, Nicholas Reinberg, the coroner, former coroner. Any individual that had that information could and should have passed it on, whether by informal chat with me or through one of my officers. Back to the Middle Ages, it's always been the case that there is a duty to inform the coroner. It's nothing new, close quote. I thought it was extraordinary that he phrases that it could have been done via the means of an informal chat. I.e. that what I take from that is that you could just have a little chat with somebody on the phone, and there might not even be a record of it kept. That's bizarre to me. If you were making a report of a suspected murder or suspected foul play to the police, it would be formally recorded, wouldn't it? It would be precisely formal and a matter of record that you'd done that, and all the details would be there that you could then look back at later on in the process. In the process of so I'm just stunned by that he would think it would be appropriate to have an informal chat about it. I don't know what anybody else thinks. It doesn't sound like something that would be then recorded, would it? Anyway, one consultant. This goes back to the main text now. One consultant, Dr. Ravi Jayaram, gave evidence twice to the inquest into the death of baby A, Letby's first victim, it says in the article here. Well, that's obviously not the case, but anyway, that's what it's written here. In October 2016. So that's a month after the RCPCH has been. By which time he was convinced Lucy Letby had murdered the child. That's quite a strong statement in this article. I'm not sure that's the case, actually. Anyway, yet he said nothing. Reinberg's reaction when he found out was, quote, absolute horror. He added, why not? Why wouldn't you? If that had come out at the inquest, I think I would have adjourned. It wouldn't have gone on any further, and I would probably have sought police involvement. That's another strange quote. But just to go back to the thing when I said I'm not so sure about that. The idea that he was convinced Lucy Letby had murdered the child. This is all about when things are being said, and when they're being said about what you thought in times gone by. I'm not sure that they were convinced of murders then in their own minds. This is something that they've said after the event, after the investigations got underway, They have to reconstruct. I'm talking about Jayaram and Beery and others now. They have to reconstruct the past, which obviously doesn't bode well for them when they have to explain, well, why didn't you say anything? Why didn't you say anything? But they have to reconstruct the past as part of the angle of their story is that they were telling the management that this was happening, but the management wasn't doing anything. But obviously we have this constant stream of opposition to that from the management saying, well, we weren't being told you thought there were murders. We weren't being told that. Otherwise we would have done something. And the same with Alison Kelly and others. It's a reconstruction of the past after the event. And now it's becoming sort of hardened into the idea that this report is saying that that's what Jayaram, he was convinced then. Because he said he was convinced then, retrospectively. But was he, though? Was he at the time? Is it real? Do you see what I mean? It's something that's been created after the event to make sense of what's happened since. In other words, an investigation and then a trial and then these convictions. That's the problem here with making assumptions and drawing inferences about what people actually were convinced by at that time, just because they're saying they were convinced by it after the event, years after the event, because they have to make it fit with the story that they're telling. The story of being at war with a management that won't listen, even though the management, and they can prove it obviously, there's no documents of emails saying there are these murders and you're doing nothing about it at this period in time. Are there? There's nothing there. There's no meeting in which that's being said directly, and then the management aren't saying, well, we're going to ignore that. We know you're convinced, Dr. Jayaram, that Lucy Letby murdered baby A, but we're just going to ignore that. So it's not the case. It's just it's a reconstruction. The danger here with this kind of reporting is that there's not enough nuance there to look at the reality of what the likelihood of what somebody was either convinced or not by. I think it's all under suspicion. Anyway, I'll go on. Next section says Postmortem findings. 6 of the 7 babies Lucy Letby was later convicted of murdering had a paediatric postmortem examination. This is by somebody else who's also since retired, called Dr. George Kokai, the pathologist. But they were signed off by Reinberg, the former coroner, and described by him as, quote, absolutely meticulous, not in any way deficient or unsatisfactory when placed against a forensic post-mortem. That's interesting. So he's sort of saying there, the way I understand it, is that there's no essential difference between that and a forensic post-mortem. If there's nothing deficient, if you place them together, if you did a forensic post-mortem and the post-mortem that was done, there was nothing deficient in it, it wouldn't be deficient in relation to a forensic post-mortem. And yet no foul play was detected in any case. He said retained samples and toxicological sampling were also standard at Alderhay, where the examinations took place. I wonder if that's something that can be further looked into, if they've held on to these retained samples and toxicological sampling. Is that an avenue that's going to be further explored as things move on with the new defence? I say team, but it's more like an army, isn't it? When it's quoted by Mark MacDonald, we've got 50 to 60 people working at this. Pro bono, experts from all over the world. No signs of death, I'm back to reading here. No signs of death by air embolism were detected. The cause of all 7 deaths, according to prosecution expert Dr. Dewey Evans, no signs of death by air embolism were detected, but it was deemed the cause of all 7 deaths, according to prosecution expert Dr. Dewey Evans. he's saying that was the cause, but there were no signs of any of that on the postmortems. A forensic postmortem would, according to Reinberg, have had a forensic pathologist and a police officer looking on for signs of criminality, but they may well not have found any. That's curious to me. They may well not have found any. We've already got Reinberg saying that the postmortem that was conducted was not would not have been deficient if you compared it with a forensic postmortem, with a forensic pathologist doing it. In other words, they did everything that they would have done had it been a forensic pathologist and a forensic postmortem. So there's a bit of a contradiction there to say, well, they might not have, the idea the police officer's the average police officer looking on for signs of criminality. So that's, what individual, it's the idea that he's some kind of expert in forensic postmortems as well, so he might spot something that the forensic pathologist won't see. That seems a bit of a stretch. The idea of the police officer being there, is going to add anything of any value. It's going to be the forensic pathologist telling the police officer what they find, isn't it, really? But they may well not have. In other words, leaving it open that they might have done. That's a contradiction to what was said before by Reinberg when he says what was done by George Kakai was not deficient, would not be deficient if you compared it to a forensic forensic examination. So a forensic post-mortem, sorry. So if it's not deficient, he's kind of saying that it's essentially the same, isn't he? Anyway, there we are. Is it just a matter of the title of the person doing it rather than a list of the actual actions taken in it and the samples taken? It's suggestive that there is no difference because he's saying it wouldn't be deficient if you compared it with a forensic one. Next section says sole inquest, S-O-L-E, sole inquest. I suppose that's the only inquest. Baby A was the only one to have a coroner's inquest. The post-mortem was not able to ascertain the cause of death, and neither, after 16 months of investigating, could the inquest. So, well, that's all been overturned, obviously. Anyway, it doesn't matter what they could or couldn't do. After 16 months of investigating, the inquest couldn't do it either. As Reinberg observed, it didn't really achieve very much. It brought the legal process to an end, but without any solid answers, and sadly that can be the case, that the evidence just isn't there. It can't be found. Close quote. So that was a quote from Reinberg again. And yet Dr. Evans found it very quickly. This is Dr. Phil Hammond writing. And yet Dr. Evans found it very quickly, just by looking at the notes. Yeah. Shabby notes, by the way, that's my interjection. Shabby, out of order, upside down, all over the shop, very shabby notes, according to Evans himself. And according to the police, like taking a whole bunch of paper and throwing them up in the air and seeing where they land, as per the hummingbird video. He, meaning Evans, told MD, that's Private Eye, Dr. Phil Hammond, that he would have spotted the air embolism in baby A had he been called in sooner, and many of the murders could have been prevented. How did Evans spot these murders so confidently just by looking at the notes when everybody else, and then there's a list here, police, 7 Chester paediatricians, internal reviews, external reviews, that's talking about the Horden review, and then the following look at 4 of those cases that Horden looked at by a separate neonatal pathologist. That's outside of George Kakai, of course, separate one. The coroner themselves, as part of this inquest in relation to baby A, The Panchester Child Death Overview Panel had failed. So how could Evans do it, just based on the notes, when all those people altogether had failed? He needs to tell the Thirlwall inquiry how he can spot murders when others can't, but he hasn't been called. I just want to interject here that another person that hasn't been called, that I'm staggered wouldn't be called if you were really interested to find out what was going on in that unit at that time, is Dr. Alison Timmis, the consultant who wrote to Chief Executive Tony Chambers in December 2015 that the ward was unsafe, and she had the premonition, it would seem, that children would die. That's what she said in her email. But not because of a murderer, but because the ward was unsafe, the unit was unsafe. They were flooded with cases they couldn't keep up with, in conjunction with an absolutely dangerous level of cover, both nursing and medical cover, an absence of cover to run that unit safely. And she said in the email, nobody's listening to us. Children are going to die, and there's going to be breakdowns of staff because we're just overwhelmed, essentially. That's the basic tenor of that email. But it's a premonition, or it's a statement of likelihood that children are going to die. And again, this is written in December 2015, and that is what happened. Further children died in the following year, not because of a murder, but because of, really, what Alison Timmis was talking about. And perhaps other factors as well, such as the Pseudomonas aeruginosa, which she doesn't mention in her email to Chambers. So yeah, she's utterly conspicuous by her absence. That must be by design. It's an extraordinary omission. It's a deliberate omission. It's a strategic omission by a corrupt inquiry, by a corrupt person leading that inquiry, talking about Thirlwall herself and everybody involved in this inquiry, to omit somebody like a bit of evidence like that, and to really drill into what her experience and memories were of that time working in that unit. To not have her there, I'm talking about Dr. Alison Timmis, a consultant there at the time, who said that children were going to die. Nobody else was saying that. Nobody else was projecting that into the future. They were whispering and bullying Lucy Letby with these whispering campaigns and this mutterings in the corridor about a nurse being responsible, nurse death, and almost like turning it into some dark joke. But this was a serious projection into the future by a consultant on that unit that Thirlwall deems it unnecessary to call. And that's obviously says a lot about Thirlwall herself and the whole inquiry and everybody involved with it. Anyway, next section. Fresh charges. Cheshire Constabulary started briefing the media about possible future charges against Lucy Letby, relating to more deaths and collapses at the Countess of Chester and at Liverpool Women's Hospital, where Lucy Letby worked as a student. If they have solid evidence of deliberate harm, it's clearly their duty to prosecute. If it's more hypothetical coincidences with plausible alternative explanations and no forensic proof, it could be a huge waste of public money. But just one more charge would lead to more reporting restrictions to silence the doubters again. There's a sense there in that last sentence from Dr. Phil Hammond that a recognition of the potential strategy being used by the police in conjunction with the whole criminal justice system is, how do we shut people up at this point in time? It's getting too loud. The noise, as Justice Thirlwall calls it, the noise is really deafening now. It's not a noise, of course. It's a clamour for truth and justice about which she cares nothing at all. And neither does the system as a whole. But certain individuals within the system, such as Mark MacDonald, clearly do. Just one more charge would lead to more reporting restrictions. Yes, I suppose that's the case. I'm sure there are many of us online that wouldn't be stopped by that. But of course, it's in terms of the momentum being gathered here, the gathering momentum, it's really important that everyone who's reporting on this carries on reporting, and that isn't stopped. But I don't think it's going to happen, because it will just it makes it worse for them. It would make it worse for Cheshire Police, because it's not going to lead to anything. And it's not. I've got to challenge what Dr. Phil Hammond's saying there. The idea, just don't do it because it would be a huge waste of public money. Oh, they're happy to spend as much public money as they can to keep the lid on this. It's not about the waste of public money that they shouldn't do it. It's that it's morally wrong, and they're doing it they would be doing it for utterly cynical, strategic purposes, solely to protect themselves when they know this is about to utterly explode. And once Lucy Letby is exonerated, it'll explode in their faces. That's the primary reason not to do it, because it's wrong. Yes, it will waste public money, which is also wrong. But the primary wrong thing is that they would be doing it in a malicious way. There's something else there that bothered me when I read that. This is years down the line, so many years down the line. They're not going to do it. They're not going to do it for this reason. They can see that the convictions are all being challenged now. They can see that Evans is no longer believable. He's not credible at all. And that's for the cases they quote unquote won. So are they going to bring some of these cases that they never thought they would ever bring to try to back that up? They know that's not going to work as a strategy. It's going to make them look more foolish, more desperate, more cynical, more criminal in a way, in a moral sense. The police I'm talking about, and the CPS and the criminal justice system as a whole, as a gang, if you will. To do that, it will look so overtly, morally dubious and criminal, actually, and such a deficit of honour and decency, and be so obvious to the world that that's what they're doing. And if the purpose would be just to shut people up, well, as Mark MacDonald said at the press conference, these things don't go away. OK, they shut people up for another 6 months, 9 months. They won't be shutting everybody up, won't be shutting a lot of people on YouTube and other people doing stuff. Whether it's on YouTube is not the point. It's just that they'll be shutting up certain journalists, of course, who work for newspapers, who will abide by those restrictions. But it wouldn't mean nobody stops talking about it for that period of time. But precisely, it would be a limited period of time again, and it wouldn't lead anywhere. In the end, it would look worse for them, worse and worse and worse, in the context of the convictions already looking absolutely absurd as they are. Anyway, the next section is freshly paid experts. I do disagree with this. It says the following: the police won't have Evans next time. He told MD he has retired from Letby work. However, other experts will doubtless step forward as the pay is so good. An expert employed at the outset by the police and then by the court for the duration of a long trial will comfortably trouser £500,000. In contrast, many of the experts working for Lucy Letby are doing it pro bono. Well, my understanding is that all the experts working for Lucy Letby's current team are doing it pro bono. That's not the main dispute I have with this paragraph. It's that the idea that they will find anybody to, well, certainly not to. The trouble is here, the idea that a fresh expert can come in and feel they're on safe ground dealing with any of this now. They know they can't because they're carrying the weight of Evans. They're carrying the complete failure of Evans. They're carrying every dubious aspect of Evans and the fact he's utterly unreliable and that you can change his mind about the method of murder a year after the event. He's utterly incredible, not credible. And they're carrying all that, whether it's about the idea of bringing other charges to do with a previous period of time, which they won't do anyway, or in the event of a retrial. This idea of the police won't have Evans next time. What is next time? That's related to the previous paragraph about bringing further charges. Well, that's not going to happen for the reasons I've already said. It's just not going to happen. So I think that's a misapprehension of what's going on here. It's a misreading of it, in my humble opinion, a misreading of it. But talking about experts per se, who may or may not appear at a retrial of the convictions already achieved, well, that's not going to happen either. Who's going to do it? Because they're hitched to a corpse. They're hitched to the corpse of Evans's rubbish. They've got to stand by Evans in order to appear for the prosecution, haven't they? If Evans literally can't be called again as an expert to back his own work, even to back his own reports, you've got to find an expert that's got to back Evans publicly. And as we know already, literally no one in the world has come forward to speak to Dr. Phil Hammond or to anyone else to back Evans's reports and his views, his scientific and medical conclusions in his absurd and ridiculous and fraudulent reports. No one's done it. So do you think someone's going to do it just because they're going to get paid some money? It will destroy them. They'd be made equally risible as Evans is risible now in the public eye, and becoming more so. You know, he's always been that for many of us. So no, I disagree with Dr. Phil Hammond here. They're not going to find anybody to try to prosecute or bring charges, and the police aren't going to bring those charges. You know, they just floated the thing out about the extubations at Liverpool Women's Hospital. It was blasted. It was smashed publicly, very, very quickly on Twitter, with people coming up with the actual figures. You know, the stuff that they tried on at Thirlwall about percentages, and it was just blown apart quickly, within a day, within hours. They're not going to do it. They're not going to do it. And if Evans did submit these so-called 25 other cases, and whether they're two lots of 25 cases, i.e. there's variant reports from the New Yorker article, and then from Dr. Phil Hammond himself, that these 25 extra cases of suspected deliberate harm were submitted by Evans to the Cheshire Police, in the view of the New Yorker, or in their report in 2018, and according to what Dr. Philip Hammond says Evans told him in 2023, is that two lots of 25. Either way, nothing's been done about them because there's nothing there to do. They're not going to dare touch any of that stuff. They know how precarious everything is now. It's more than precarious. It's going in one direction only. And they know that. There's no way they're going to bring any further charges. They're not going to do it. If they do it, it will be so obvious that they're doing it for the cynical reasons of trying to, quote-unquote, silence the doubters again, as Dr. Phil Hammond says. But it won't go away. These things don't go away, as Mark MacDonald said at the press meeting. I think I'll go on to the final bit. So yeah, and if there's a retrial, I think they're utterly stuffed. The prosecution is utterly stuffed. If Evans can't or won't be appearing for them, then you're really asking some other expert, the fresh expert, to come in. Even if you're paying them a lot of money, they're hitched to the dragging the skeleton along of the rubbish that Evans has come up with. And are they going to do that to themselves? Is anybody going to do that to themselves? It'd be like shooting yourself in the head, wouldn't it? How could you do that? Then they won't find anybody to do that. Nobody. And the system knows that if it goes to a retrial, it won't happen. Essentially, you've got to quash the verdict because the prosecution won't be able to field anybody. They won't field anybody. That's my view. That's my sense of it completely. It wouldn't make any sense to do so, would it? Because they know they're going to get smashed, so they won't turn up. They won't turn up. And you couldn't have an independent expert coming in to replay it, because they're stuck. They're stuck with what Evans has said already, and it's rubbish. It's like carrying a whole... Anyway, I don't need to use any more analogies. I'll move on to the last bit. Last section is called Convictions Undermined. Convictions Undermined. On the 16th of December, as the eye goes to press, Lucy Letby's barrister Mark MacDonald is releasing, quote, evidence that significantly undermines her convictions, close quote. MacDonald now has 2 detailed and lengthy evidence-based documents written by practicing level 3 neonatologists who have gone through all the clinical records and give clear explanations of how baby O and baby C died. I just want to add something in there because I remember Dr. Taylor said something. He hadn't seen the medical notes, but he had access to the reports. So there seems to be a disjunction there between what Dr. Phil Hammond is reporting here, because Dr. Taylor said he made the fine point of saying, I have had access to all the reports which made use of all the notes, but rather than all the notes themselves. That's the point I want to make. Going back to the article, in their opinion, this is the opinion of the neonatologist, the deaths have nothing to do with Lucy Letby, but they do raise serious concerns about standards of clinical care on the unit at the time. Well, that's an understatement, isn't it, in relation to baby O? That's an understatement. Next paragraph. Each document is more than 30,000 words, extensively cross-referenced to the documented clinical records. Again, I'm not sure, is it cross-referenced to the reports? I don't know. There was something that Dr. Taylor definitely said, that he didn't have access to the primary records, but he has had access to the reports, and he made that point. Anyway, I won't keep sweating that. Clinical records, and each took more than a month to compile. Are the findings of these new reports more plausible and evidence-based than those of Dr. Evans? Well, yeah, obviously, yeah. And I think, there's a bit of there's a tone of irony that runs through all these, especially the latter ones, and obviously this one, Dr. Phil Hammond's articles. Yeah, obviously, he's asking questions he knows the answers to. Yeah, of course they are going to be. I'm basing that on everything he's obviously said about Evans already, and the mockery and the not so hidden mockery of him. Just finishing off here, MacDonald may also present results of the statistical analysis Cheshire Police commissioned and then cancelled on the advice of the CPS when they realised it wouldn't be in their interests. That's the Professor of Statistics from Warwick University. Her name escapes me just now, but everybody will know who she is, who's been following this. I could look it up, but I just want to finish it. It's getting too long, this video. When they realised it wouldn't be in their interests, did they fail to disclose this to the defence, along with other key information? Well, I think we know that they did. Otherwise, I think we know that nobody's saying, oh, here's the part of the trial where Myers says, oh, about this commission you made with regard to the statistical analysis. Why did the CPS drop it? It wasn't made explicit in the trial that Myers was aware of it, and he didn't make a point of it. I suppose that's a reasonable inference that wasn't shared with the defence, along with other key information about sharing with the defence back in the trial in 2022 and 3 and 2024. And there's in brackets here some other key information being the outbreak of Pseudomonas bacterium, the expert reviews in Lucy Letby's favour. Those expert reviews must be pointing to the Horden report, and then the supplementary report by the following neonatologist, neonatal pathologist who looked at those 4 individual cases that Dr. Horden said needed further looking at. With regard to the Pseudomonas bacterium, I would say that was the onus was on the defence to establish that was the case there by asking those questions of the hospital and their fact finding, process should have been found out. What bacteria, potential pathogens were on that unit, and then the hospital would have had a legal duty to inform them of the Pseudomonas outbreak. It's not the idea. It should not be the idea that you have to wait for the prosecution to tell you about that. You should have found that out. They should have found that out proactively. Talking about the defence now, should have found it out proactively. Shouldn't be relying on the prosecution to tell them about that. Is that right? Do people agree with that? That's what I feel. Last little bit of this article in Private Eye. Have more door swipe data errors been discovered, casting doubt on Lucy Letby's presence at some of the collapses? Well, we had heard this blithe overview statement from the CPS saying, well, it wouldn't have affected anything else. Cheshire Police / CPS saying, okay, there was an element of it in the Baby K case, which they still don't care about the ramifications of that. But they made this comment, and did they not, saying that, it wouldn't have affected any of the other cases. But you've got to, do you trust them on that? Obviously not. That's got to be looked into. Has it been looked into? I'm sure that Mark MacDonald and his team are looking into it, every part of that, I would hope. Most alarmingly, and then we've got the porosity, the openness of that unit with that back door leading to the fire escape, which is on a code which would have been all round that hospital. People would have known that, probably would have cut through there. People not in that unit, people would have known that code all round that hospital. People, medical people, admin people, etc., etc., etc. It blows apart the whole notion of door swipe data. You can't tell who is in that unit, apart from verbal testimony, witness testimony of saying I saw such and such a person there. You don't know definitively, but in terms of data, who was in any given place at any given time, because of the openness of that unit, by virtue of that doorway with that code, which no doubt probably hundreds of people would have known that 4-figure code. Anyway, I've read that bit there. Most alarmingly, Evans has retracted a key method of murder post-trial. Yeah, in 3, possibly 4 cases. I know at the press conference there, Mark MacDonald says he mentioned 4 cases. I had hitherto thought it was 3. But anyway, it's 3's enough, isn't it? 1's enough. Evans has retracted a key method of murder post-trial. A year down the line, he's just moved the goalpost and said, oh, well, if you don't like this method of murder, I've got another one. If you don't like this one, I've got another one. And if you don't like the new one, I've got another one for you. And if you don't like that, we can just say, she's just obviously guilty because she's a very clever criminal, as Evans depicted Lucy Letby. Which is all self-flattery, because it's the idea that, but not as clever as me, Evans. Not as clever as me, Evans. I'm cleverer. Well, it's because he's making it all up. And that's obviously being demonstrated to the world as we speak. Whether this is enough, last little bit, whether this is enough to speed the processes of the Criminal Cases Review Commission or go straight to the appeal court remains to be seen. Indeed it does. Mark MacDonald says he's getting both those submissions in this week, so maybe today or tomorrow, or maybe they've already gone yesterday. So they're in. Obviously, the point made in the press conference with Mark MacDonald was that Criminal Cases Review Commission He didn't say it. I'm going to say it. It's a horrible, ghastly, corrupt, useless piece of crap organisation that's very happy for people, innocent people, to be waiting around while they mess around for years and years doing nothing with cases, just letting them moulder in their offices, doing nothing about it, and eventually get round to it, and then somebody's let out who's obviously innocent. So they're a disaster. So yes, it's got to be really straight to the appeal court and then quash these convictions. Straight to the appeal court. The clear, obvious knowledge that the CPS can't field another prosecution team of experts. Nobody will appear for them. Evans is finished. He's completely smashed. He won't show his face again, let alone show his face in a court again. That's going to be the state of affairs. They'll quash the verdicts. They're not going to replay the trial again. They're not going to replay the trial again having no experts on their side. Nobody's going to turn up for it on their side. They'll just say, okay, we're folding, quash the verdicts, unsafe, completely unsafe. There is no case to answer. Now, Lucy Letby is exonerated and freed, and then things go from there. Thank you very much. All the best. Bye-bye.